Steve McQueen was painting dead leaves green at 3 a.m. when David Piper lost his leg. Not metaphorically, literally. The king of cool, the man who defined masculine perfection on screen, was standing in a French forest with a spray can, covering autumn leaves in emerald paint because his obsession with cinematic authenticity had driven him completely insane. And 12 hours later, that same obsession would split a Porsche 917 in half and destroy a man's life forever. This is the story of how Steve McQueen's pursuit of the perfect racing film turned into a nightmare that Hollywood tried to bury. The story of a veteran driver named David Piper who trusted the wrong man. And the story of how sometimes the price of perfection is paid in blood and metal and a human leg that can never grow back. Le Mans, France, November 1970. The most expensive disaster in cinema history was unfolding in slow motion, and nobody wanted to admit they were watching a man lose his mind. Steve McQueen had sunk $7 million of his own money into this project. Not studio money, his money, money he'd earned doing stunts and delivering lines with that trademark squint. He was betting everything on a racing film that would revolutionize cinema. A film where the cars would be real, the speed would be real, the danger would be real. The problem was, Steve McQueen had forgotten that the people could get really hurt too. McQueen wasn't sleeping. Crew members would find him at sunrise, crouched beside the Porsche 917s, his hands black with motor oil, adjusting carburetors that didn't need adjusting. He'd lost 20 pounds. His eyes had that hollow look of a man who'd crossed the line between dedication and madness. He would speak to the cars like they were alive, whispering to the engines about gear ratios and aerodynamics while ignoring the humans around him. "Steve's gone," one crew member wrote to his wife. "He's not an actor anymore. He's not even a person. He's become some kind of racing ghost." But the ghost was about to demand a sacrifice. The leaves were dying, and McQueen was at war with time itself. He'd been filming Le Mans since June, but autumn was coming to the French countryside, and the trees were turning gold and brown. The continuity was ruined. In McQueen's mind, racing happened in summer. Green leaves, green grass, green money flowing into theaters worldwide. So every morning before dawn, he deployed teams of workers with spray paint to cover the dying forest in artificial life. "Paint the leaves," he ordered, standing in the pre-dawn darkness like a general commanding an army of lunatics. "All of them. Every single leaf. I don't care if it takes all night. The audience will notice." The crew exchanged glances. The audience would never notice. But telling Steve McQueen that the audience wouldn't notice something was like telling a hurricane it was being too windy. You just stayed out of the way and hoped you survived. David Piper was supposed to be the professional voice of reason in this chaos. At 39, he was a veteran racing driver from England, a man who'd survived crashes that killed other men. He'd raced at Le Mans 17 times. He understood speed. He understood danger. What he didn't understand was Steve McQueen's relationship with both. Piper had been hired to drive the Porsche 917 in the most dangerous sequence of the film. The car was a beast, a 900 horsepower monster designed to hit 240 miles per hour on straight roads. In the hands of a skilled driver, it was poetry in motion. In the hands of the wrong driver, it was a $200,000 missile with a person inside. McQueen wanted the sequence filmed at dawn, when the light was soft and golden. He wanted the camera mounted inside the car to capture every vibration, every moment of terror. He wanted the audience to feel like they were dying at 150 miles per hour. "This isn't acting," McQueen told Piper the night before the shoot. "This is truth. Real speed, real danger, real cinema." Piper studied McQueen's face in the garage light. "Steve, it's just a movie." McQueen's jaw tightened. "No, it's the movie, the one that changes everything." November 2nd, 1970, dawn at the Circuit de la Sarthe. The mist was rising off the track like smoke from a funeral pyre. The Porsche 917 sat in the pit lane, its Gulf oil colors gleaming blue and orange in the early light. The car looked like a work of art. It was about to become a work of destruction. David Piper suited up in his racing gear. White helmet, fire-resistant suit, the same ritual he'd performed thousands of times. But something felt different that morning. Maybe it was McQueen's manic energy, the way he stalked the pit lane like a caged animal. Maybe it was the crew's nervous silence. Or maybe it was just the cold November air that made everything feel fragile. The cameras were rolling, multiple angles. McQueen had spent $50,000 just on camera equipment for this one sequence. He stood at the pit wall, headset around his neck, watching through a telephoto lens as Piper fired up the 917's flat 12 engine. The sound was like controlled thunder, 900 horsepower contained in aluminum and steel. Remember, McQueen's voice crackled through Piper's radio. I want to see the fear in your eyes. I want the audience to feel the speed. Piper accelerated down the Mulsanne Straight. 120 miles per hour, 140, 160. The world became a blur of Armco barriers and autumn trees. Through his helmet, he could hear McQueen's breathing on the radio, heavy and obsessed, like he was experiencing the speed secondhand. Then something went wrong. The 917's rear suspension, stressed by months of high-speed filming, finally surrendered to physics. At 150 miles per hour, the left rear wheel separated from the car. Not gradually, instantly. One moment, Piper was flying in a perfectly balanced racing machine. The next moment, he was riding a 2,000-pound missile that had forgotten how to be a car. The Porsche 917 didn't just crash. It exploded into pieces. The impact with the Armco barrier split the car perfectly in half, the engine bay separating from the cockpit like someone had used a giant can opener. Piper's half of the car tumbled down the track in a shower of sparks and debris, while the engine half bounced over the barrier and into the trees. From the pit wall, McQueen watched through his telephoto lens as his perfect shot became a perfect nightmare. The silence that followed the crash was absolute. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the smoke and scattered metal. Then someone screamed, and the spell was broken. Piper was conscious, but trapped in what remained of the cockpit. His legs were pinned under twisted metal. Blood was everywhere. But the real danger wasn't the crash itself. The real danger was what came next. Motor oil from the destroyed engine was pouring across the track like a black river. Brake fluid, transmission fluid, hydraulic fluid, all of it mixing together into a toxic cocktail that was seeping into Piper's open wounds. The chemicals that made the car run were now poisoning the driver. McQueen reached the crash site first, not because he cared about Piper, but because he wanted to see if the cameras had captured everything. He stood over the wreckage, his face blank, calculating angles and light, while Piper bled into the French tarmac. "Did we get it?" McQueen asked the camera operator. "Tell me we got the shot." The paramedics arrived and began extracting Piper from the wreckage. It took 45 minutes to cut through the twisted metal. 45 minutes of motor oil and brake fluid soaking into open flesh. 45 minutes of chemical contamination that would soon become infection. As they loaded Piper into the ambulance, McQueen was already planning the next shot. In the hospital, doctors worked to clean Piper's wounds, but the damage was done. The petroleum-based fluids had contaminated his bloodstream. Infection set in within 24 hours. Then gangrene. The tissue in his right leg began to die, and no amount of antibiotics could save it. While Piper fought for his life, McQueen continued filming. The next morning, he was back in the forest with his spray paint crews, covering more dead leaves in artificial green. The show must go on. The movie must be perfect. "How is David?" a crew member asked. McQueen didn't look up from the Porsche engine he was examining. "The doctors will handle that. My job is to finish the film." The amputation happened on November 15th, 1970, 13 days after the crash. David Piper, a man who had spent his life controlling machines at impossible speeds, woke up to find that his right leg was gone, cut off below the knee. The price of Steve McQueen's perfect shot was a human limb that would never grow back. McQueen visited the hospital once. He stood at the foot of Piper's bed, hands in his pockets, that familiar squint hiding whatever emotions he might have felt. "I'm sorry this happened," McQueen said, his voice flat. Piper looked at him through the morphine haze. "Will you at least use the footage?" McQueen didn't answer immediately. The crash sequence was spectacular. The cameras had captured everything. The split second when the car became shrapnel, the rolling fire, the mechanical ballet of destruction. It was exactly what he'd wanted. "I don't know," McQueen said finally. "It might be too real." That was the closest Steve McQueen ever came to admitting he'd gone too far. Le Mans was released in 1971 to devastating reviews and empty theaters. The film that Steve McQueen had sacrificed a man's leg to create was declared boring, pretentious, and commercially worthless. It lost millions. McQueen's obsession with automotive perfection had produced the most expensive failure of his career. The crash footage of David Piper's accident was never used in the final film. David Piper never raced professionally again. He learned to walk with a prosthetic leg, learned to drive with hand controls, learned to live with phantom pain that would wake him up screaming for the rest of his life. He became a mechanic, working on the same types of cars that had destroyed his body. Years later, when asked about Steve McQueen, Piper would say, "He wasn't evil. He was just so in love with perfection that he forgot people weren't machines. You can replace a carburetor. You can't replace a leg." Steve McQueen never made another racing film. Some say it was because the market wasn't there. Others believe he'd learned that some prices are too high to pay, even for perfection. But late at night, alone in his Malibu garage, McQueen would still work on engines until dawn, his hands black with oil, whispering to machines that would never answer back. And sometimes, if you listened carefully, you could hear him apologizing to the ghosts of speed, to the men who'd paid the price for his dreams. The lesson of Le Mans isn't about racing or filmmaking. It's about what happens when obsession replaces humanity, when the pursuit of perfection becomes more important than the people who make it possible. David Piper gave his leg so Steve McQueen could paint leaves green and chase a perfect shot that was never perfect enough. Was McQueen's artistic vision worth Piper's sacrifice, or should some dreams remain just dreams?